I said to God, look, I'll come back to you, but I have to know two things. One, are you real? And two, do you love me?
Welcome back to Conversations. My name is Emma.
And I'm Jenny. Today, we speak with Mona Hennein, a television producer with 5 Emmys and a good friend.
Mona will be sharing her personal story of trauma and how she now uses that to help others.
Let's jump in.
Mona, welcome to
Yes,
the
thank you. It's a
podcast.
pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
So, Mona, you and I met years ago working on a television program, and we hit it off. You were my first Egyptian friend and probably still my only one. I need to work
Oh,
on that.
there are many of us
But
around.
you have since then, or I guess part of that time, won 5 Emmys
Mhm.
in your television work.
Wow.
But you have a really interesting origin story starting in Egypt. Can you share that with us?
Sure. I am the daughter of Egyptian missionaries, and they actually have a little claim to fame. They were the first Christian missionaries from Egypt to go anywhere in the world, and they chose to go to South Sudan before it was its own independent country. So that was before I was born. Then a war broke out in South Sudan, and they ended up going to Kenya, where I grew up. So they were missionaries to in Kenya to the Maasai and Kikuyu tribes. That's their legacy, and all I know is I was a daughter of a missionary. But later we found out they have changed hundreds and thousands of lives, really, through their work. So that's a little bit in my blood. A little bit of my story is now as I went into what I loved, a field that I loved, which is storytelling and television and media. um, I now discovered that I like using media to be a digital missionary. So that's what I call myself, a modern day digital missionary. I haven't really quite found the right term, but maybe you, Jenny, being the perfect writer, could help me with that. I'm a digital media
No, I
missionary. Who knows? I don't know. Something.
I like that. I
I
like
do
that.
too. And that's like a way that you can reach so many more people, because if you
Correct.
have to physically be somewhere, I mean, that's like a lot of traveling. But when not everyone, but most people have access, to media. Wow, that's amazing. Did you always want to do television, or what kind of got you started into that?
No, I didn't always. If you grow up as an Egyptian, you have two choices of careers. One is you either be a doctor or an engineer. So I was set out to medical school. The idea of we didn't know anything else existed. But when I was studying for my MCATs, I was working in a lab, and um, my boss looked at some of my writing because I wrote for a newspaper on the side and said, you're actually not a really great scientist. I think you should go into media. You should pursue your writing because you're not going to make it as a scientist. So I took his advice and went on to get a master's in communications and launched from there. I did take one class in television, and I was just like, this is it. This is what I want to do the rest of my life. I want to do television, and now it's video production and media production. To me, it was the most exciting thing in the world.
So you started in journalism and news within television, and
Correct.
then tell us what happened, why you decided to make a change.
So I did start out in news. I was very interested, getting the story, the excitement of getting a story. I did work for some major networks, and for a while was on the freelance list in Chicago. And so I got called by a network. It was a major news program that you guys would have heard of because there was a school shooting in Chicago at Northern Illinois University. And I remember going out, they would send maybe 5 or 10 producers out, go get the stories. So I got my stories, and then they said, will you please hang out at the hospital to get the injured? And I remember, it's midnight, 1 in the morning. So I was standing outside this hospital, and I'll never forget, this is the moment that changed my life, was a gentleman came out and he had a bandage on his head. So I ran up to him. I said, "Hi, I'm Mona Hennein from this network. We want to interview you." And he had this look, stunned look on his face. And he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I almost died today, and you want to interview me?" And I guess it's at that moment where I realized that I was just looking for a story. And he had just been through trauma, through crisis, and I was completely oblivious to that. I was just competing with these other producers, these other networks to try to get the story. And my lack of empathy was shocking to me. And I looked at him and I said, You're absolutely right. I'm really, really sorry." And it was like midnight or 1. I called New York and I said, "I quit. I'm not, I'm not doing this anymore." Part of that experience, I also learned that when people do survive, almost always they will tell you, I always ask them, "How did you survive this?" or "How did you make it?" or what got you through it?" And almost every time they all said, "God," or "My faith. I prayed." And then that was the part that was fascinating to me, that no matter what faith, what background, where they came from, that people in a moment of crisis will pray. It doesn't matter. And God always answered that prayer. You know, 90% of the world has some sort of faith, have some sort of understanding of a higher power of God, but it's not often talked about. I prayed. I asked God to help me, and there was always an answer to prayer. Always. You can't pray in the pit and not get an answer. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to try to tell that story? Wouldn't it be great to have a TV show that answers the "and then"? I probably should have called the program "And Then," but I didn't have you around, Jenny, at that time to also help me with that title. you know, we received grants to tell that story and produced a series called Life Focus, and to tell the story of "And Then." And it wasn't just testimonies. We always covered stories that had a social implication plus a personal story that matched it. So it wasn't always, "I found Jesus and then everything became okay," because life is I love the complicated story. "I found Jesus, everything was okay, but then, as life is, you could find Christ and it gets better, but then it's not better. So does that mean Jesus wasn't there?" I love that question. So that was the genesis of our media production company. I did receive a small grant to start Life Focus Media, where I could produce stories of faith. And I really wanted them to be on secular networks. So what I found really surprising, I mean, at first there was some resistance, to be honest with you, because I went to PBS and they said, "We really don't do Christian programming." I was talking to them, "No, no, no, no." And I said, "Could you please just look at our tape," which kind of dates me. And no, we're not going to. I sent the tape anyway. Finally, the woman that was approving the programming told me, "Please don't call me again." So I didn't call her again, but I emailed her. I said, "I know you said don't call me again, but would you at least look at the tape that I sent you?" So she finally did, and she called me back and she said, "Okay, we will accept this series, but you please follow all the PBS rules." There are a lot of rules for PBS, which are very fair, which actually made me a better producer. And surprisingly, I did ask her, "Why don't you accept more Christian programming?" And she said, "Actually, we would accept more Christian programming, but where are they?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" She said, "Well, when people provide Christian programming, it's often because they're advertising their leader, or it's a 1 hour or a half hour of advertising of their ministry rather than talking about Christianity. So, or they'll say, we have to have the head of the ministry on this, or it has to be an advertisement for them. And that goes against every PBS rule." So And also, now I also am producing a documentary on eternity for ABC Network Television. And they have the same idea. Tell us about heaven and eternity and the Christian faith. Tell us what your faith believes. But don't let this be a 1 hour advertising for this ministry. So networks are open to the faith. They are open to hearing about Christianity. They are open, and we have a very great story to tell. I mean, I can also tell you, for example, the head of the Faith and Values department for ABC. Every year they put on a Christmas and Easter for the shut-ins. And they go to local ministries and they ask for, we want a church service or whatever. And she said to me, everyone prefers to put on their Christmas program. Why don't Christians like to put on their Easter program? I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, think about it. And she's Jewish, telling me this. You guys have a God who rose from the dead. And you guys would rather put on a Christmas show? He rose from the dead, crying out loud. Who else has a God that rose from the dead? I mean, she was so excited about it. And I thought about that a lot. And I said, I think you're a better Christian than most of my Christian friends. I mean, you're so excited about Jesus rising from the dead, and we don't show that same excitement. She goes, well, think. Jewish people don't have a God that rose from the dead. Who has that? So they're very open to hearing about. We do. We have a God that rose from the dead. Why aren't we shouting that from rooftops?
Yes, churches out there,
Yeah,
listen,
yeah,
make Easter bigger and fanfare.
yeah.
That's amazing.
To get a little personal, since you do faith-based programming, was there ever a time where you maybe doubted your faith or
Absolutely. It actually happened to me. And this is how I met Ginny. I was in Chicago and we had a family crisis. My brother took his own life. And here I was already producing a Christian media program. And we had been praying for my brother and for his depression. And really, I just thought to myself, that took my faith, because I had this conversation with God. First of all, I don't believe in you anymore. So I told this God that I didn't believe in anymore, that I don't believe in him, because I had done everything right in life. I was, Christian. I tithed. I was faithful in my marriage. I was a good mom. I raised my kids in the church. I had a Christian media ministry. We won awards telling stories about faith. And then you did this to me. And it kind of threw me back. And I went through about a year saying, I don't believe in God anymore. This is not true. I quit everything. I quit my job. I left my home. I left everything. And God offered this job at a Christian organization in Florida. And that's where I met Ginny, because she was a freelance producer there. And I remember sitting on the ocean, and I would watch the waves. And I said to God, look, I'll come back to you, but I have to know two things. One, are you real? And two, do you love me? So the are you real question was very easily answered, because I'm sitting here at the ocean and it's vast and beautiful. And I'd watch this beauty every day, and it was constant, beautiful. God is real. There's no question about it. For me, it was nature. But do you love me was a much harder question, because honestly, if you know God loves you, don't you think you could survive anything? I mean, you can survive anything. But this question is, God, does he really love me? Because if he doesn't love you, then what's the point? You're real, but you don't love me. So I would listen to Tim Keller's sermons, 6, 7, 8 of them a day, where every single sermon came back to the gospel. And one of his sermons, he asked this question. Jesus went to the cross and he had everything in the world. What did he want? And the answer was, he wanted you. And for some reason, that moment, the gospel was real to me. To me. It wasn't for the former prostitutes that I interviewed, or the former alcoholic, or the businessman that lost everything and came back to Christ. It was for me. And I think that's when transformation happens, when you realize Jesus died for you personally. And at that moment, I did go, back to my faith, but it was a different faith altogether because now it was much more personal. Before that, I think my faith was more of a resume. I showed God my resume. Here it is. Check, 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 check. I did it all. I actually thought I was a super Christian because I also knew theology really well. Oh my gosh, so intellectual. But I didn't know the gospel, you know? And that's when faith became real to me.
And one of the things that I loved about you right away was your honesty, your vulnerability. I had been through a divorce. At that point, I had 2 young children I was raising by myself. And, you had been through this with your brother. So I think we connected over that struggle, where is God? Does he love us? So that's beautiful, Mona.
And I
Yeah.
think most everybody can probably relate to the feeling of, okay, a God of love, how can he do XYZ, whatever struggle someone's currently facing? And I kind of have a joke with myself where I'm like, I must have been a really bad person in my past life because there's no way I deserve to go through this. Like, you would think, how you were saying, oh, I've done everything right. And yet this happens.
I think we come from a mindset, especially in this country, that we shouldn't suffer. And I think in other countries, they assume that life is suffering. That they're not. This is not. It's not a shock if something bad happens to you because life is. You will suffer. I mean, my parents came. They were kicked out of Kenya because of war. They were kicked out of Sudan because of war, and the mission board sent them here to the States. And I remember being in Chicago in January. We didn't have coats. We had nothing. And my parents came here with 4 children. How did they do that? So I think when you live in such a luxurious country where everything is, I mean, almost streets of gold, but it's not quite. I mean, I know that we have problems, but a job is not that far away. A meal is not that far away. We can worship any God we want. We're not persecuted. We're not worried about our next meal. We're not, for the most part. And that's where it got me into my work with trauma healing, that you do need to recognize that suffering is part of the human journey. It was right there in the Garden of Eden. It will be right there in the middle of your life. And it's not like, how will I get through? Of course, you're going to get through it. The answer to suffering is God is with you. You may actually lose everything, but it doesn't mean that he's not with you. You're his child. You will suffer. You will lose something that, human relationships will break apart. People will betray you. Um, and so, that's what got me into trauma healing. I did a documentary for ABC where I did a new program by the American Bible Society where they brought this trauma healing curriculum to people in the Congo. And right before my eyes, I saw people change. Right before my eyes. And basically, it was through this series, through this book, because they don't have resources there. I went to the author of this book and said, why don't we turn this into a radio program and get it all over Africa? And we created a series from that for the Iranian people, which, hopefully they're airing it on Iranian TV now, a television series. And we did one for children in the Middle East. And basically, the message of this series is that you will suffer and God has a solution for our traumas. And it's right there in scripture.
It's interesting. I was privileged to work on one of those trauma healing, maybe a
I think
couple with
too,
you.
couple, yeah,
Yeah, one for the families in the Middle East, and one for women,
right.
who face abuse and other persecution that don't have access to, like we have, counseling and
Mhm.
therapy. Um, so tell us the story, though, when I think the lady in Chicago found out what you were doing for overseas
I
communities
uh,
and kinda
right.
took you to task.
Right. So, I got a call from, Chicago Cable saying, "We were on your website. We see that you offer, trauma healing programs for children." I said, "Yes, but it's in Arabic." She said, "That's okay, that's okay. We will use it. Can you get it dubbed?" Then about a week later, she called me and she said, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, "What do you mean, what's wrong with you?" She goes, "Don't you care about us?" She says, "You're doing all these trauma healing programs for people all over the world. Don't you care about the youth here in Chicago? Don't you care about us? We have trauma here as well." And so she encouraged me. She said, "If you produce a series here addressing these traumas for youth in Chicago, we'll air it." So right now we're in the middle of raising funds for that project for the Chicago Cable. And since then, we found many, many other partners in America who would want to air this series, who would use it for their ministries or distribute it in their churches. Trauma is right in our backyard. I took a Uber in Chicago just over the weekend, and there was a, African American young mother, and she said, "I can't live in my neighborhood anymore. I have to leave. I can't do it anymore." She said, "The violence, the police don't come to us anymore. It's shootings all the time, and no one is talking about it." And so it kind of like God again in my heart I didn't tell her about what I was doing, but I told her I'd pray for her. I'm sure major cities all over America have the same problem, but Chicago is it's especially bad.
With your trauma healing programs, you're hoping to address this here in our inner cities,
That's
so
absolutely
that's
right.
wonderful.
Praying and trauma are something that every human can relate to in some way. Unfortunately, some a lot more than others, but I know our listeners can. And I think it's great that we're talking about this because it makes you not feel as alone, going manic over it and crazy and are completely breaking apart. Because no one wants to go through stuff that's awful, but it really shapes you and molds you as a person. And I joke a lot. I'm like, okay, this week was my week of something happening. Next week, you can have next week, Jenny. And we're like, okay, every week there's something literally, maybe more than once a week, something crazy happens in our life. And it's actually fun to share it with someone who can maybe not relate to that specific thing, but how crazy things happen all the time.
Exactly, and interesting that you say that, Emma, because Mona, isn't part of the trauma healing, our listeners might be interested in that, simply telling your story to people? Can you share about that?
Yes, one of the core lessons is how do you recover from trauma? One way to recover from trauma is to tell your story. But then we also teach who do you tell your story to? You can't just tell your story to someone who's going to use that story against you or who's going to judge you. But, you need to find a good listener. Um, I really believe it's telling your story and receiving God's love adds the permanence, providing that element of faith.
It reminds me of the verse from the Bible when Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden," which could be understood as carrying around all of these traumas or burden, "and I will give you rest." Not
Mhm.
I'll solve all your problems for you, but I'll be
Mhm.
with you.
Mhm.
So, is there an exercise? We did some of this in the television program. An exercise our listeners could do even on their own to help them with their trauma?
Yeah, so every episode has some sort of healing exercise that we provide. Um, some fun, some art, some deeper that require a lot more of your heart. So when you're ready, if you really have something on your heart, and I think also if you go to our website or go to the American Bible Society website, trauma healing website, you can also get some more resources to learn how to do this. But um, what we do is we call it bringing your pain to the cross. And basically, with someone else, you both could write down your pain on a piece of paper. With your friend that you trust, you pray over it and ask Christ to take this pain. And then we put it in a little like bowl for the TV series, and even in small groups. We make a little cross, you go outside and you pray over it and you put it in the bowl and you burn them before the cross. And for some reason, people do feel a relief. Now, it's not voodoo, it's not magic, it's none of that. This is literally asking Christ, as you should, here's my pain, Lord. You died for this. You died for the consequences of this suffering. We accept your forgiveness, relief, care in return. And it's a really great exercise to do. It's really better to do it with another person of faith. And you will feel better and you will feel a relief. So that is a really very powerful exercise. But there are many others you can do, but that one is especially, to me, means a lot.
We will provide links to the website and any other resources for our listeners. As we close here, I would actually like to end in prayer, if that's good with both of y'all.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I thank you for this time that we've had with Mona and hearing her story and the wonderful works that she has really devoted her energy into for people and this faith-based program and everything else that she has done. I just pray that you bless her as she continues to do this work and you provide her with all the resources, knowledge, and the heart to do it. I also pray for all of our listeners who have gone through pain and suffering that may seem too heavy to bear. Just let them know that you're with them. Give them peace. Let them feel that peace in their heart. In your name, amen.
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 Thank you,
Thank
Emma.
you.
That's beautiful. Mona, will you tell everyone your website before we go?
Sure. It's lifefocusmedia.org. So come visit us there. We involved in a lot of other projects.
Well, thank you, Mona. We've learned a lot from you and love to have you on again sometime.
I would love to be back, and I'll be praying for your podcast. I've already listened to one of them. I'm driving for 14 hours tomorrow, so I'll be listening to them. Trust me.
Oh, good.
All right.
Yay.
All right.
Follow our show.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.
Tell others about the podcast.
And for more information on today's guest, check out our show notes.
Until next time.